Hello folks, Alex here. This is Alex Unabridged. Today we're going to have a little look and see if I've read and loved a book published in every year I've been alive. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, I've seen a couple of folks do this sort of video recently. Olly over at Olly is the first one that I saw, and Mr. Troy Tradup dropped a video of this the other day, and I really like these, so I've got my own list. So yes, we're looking at have I read a book published in each year that I've been alive. So I am 42, so we've got to find 42 books. I have some gaps. This was quite hard for me. I've got some gaps, and there were some years where I'd read, kind of literally, I've read literally like one book published in that year, and it might not be something that I liked. So yeah, I wanted to find books that I'd read and loved. So if I didn't love the book that I'd read for that publishing year, I've made a note to read something else, to try and find something that I will like from that year. Or if I have not read anything from that year, I've come up with something to fill that gap with. So I'm going to try and rip through these reasonably quickly because we have got 40 something books to look at. So I won't linger on them too much. So let's start with the year of my birth, 1981. That is Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, which I did love. I read that a couple of years ago, first in the Hannibal Lecter series, of course, and I immediately went on and read the others in that series. So yes, good start, that one. Next up, 1982, we have got When the Wind Blows by Raymond Briggs. I have talked about this before on the channel. It is one of my top 10 comics and graphic novels. This tells the story of an elderly couple preparing for a nuclear holocaust, basically. And yeah, their preparations, and then also them trying to survive once the bombs actually go off. It's very sad, it's a very poignant tale, but it's got humour to it, it's got charm to it, and it's just wonderful. The typical kind of wonderful warm illustration style of Raymond Briggs as well. So yes, another one that I loved. 1983, we have come to Pet Sematary, the first of several Stephen Kings on this list. I loved this. I didn't love it when I first read it. When I was about 17, 18, something like that. Didn't really get it, I think. It was much scarier than the other Stephen Kings that I've read. But I've read it reasonably recently, like in the last 6 months or so. Now I get it. It's a fantastic book. It's an absolutely fantastic book. So yes, that is 1983. 1984 is a very recent read for me, and that was Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter. That is an absolute love. That possibly will make its way onto my top 10 fiction list, I think, when I redo that next year. Yes, absolutely wonderful tale of magic realism set at the turn of the 20th century, 19th to 20th century, in London, St. Petersburg and Siberia, full of a cast of wonderful, rich characters, and just humorous, poignant, just mesmerising piece of work. Absolutely loved it. 1985 then is The Penguin History of the USA by Hugh Brogan. This one was one of my first forays into reading about American history. I'd watched a lot of documentaries and things like that, but this was one of a handful of books that I kind of ripped through quite a few years ago now. Probably a good 15 years ago, along with The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. That was another one that I read. But yeah, The Penguin History of the USA by Hugh Brogan, very accessible work, and really, really interesting. Okay, 1986, on to another Stephen King, probably my favourite Stephen King, and that is It. Absolutely brilliant book, despite some of the flaws in it, that scene. But just, it sucks me in every time. I just love it. I love the Losers Club. I love I love all the forms that it takes. I love the discussion, if you like, around fear, and the really, really horrible human characters as well, and the fact that this town, Derry, is a character in itself. I think it's one of the most sort of vibrant books for me visually. I can picture it so vividly. So yeah, absolutely adore that book. Sticking with Mr. King, for 1987, we've got Misery. I need to reread this at some point because I didn't like this. This is the first one I would say that I did not like. So yeah, it just didn't grab me at all. I was kind of bored, I think, with it. Again, I read it when I was sort of in my early 20s. So I think it's certainly worth rereading it. Now I've read some more Stephen King, and I'm just generally kind of a more well-read person now as well, and just older. I think certainly age can help with sort of understanding some of the themes in books that maybe I wasn't ready for when I was 20, 21. But I have got an alternative for this, because this was one of the ones that was no, I didn't love it. And that is one that I will be reading for Garb August, some trashy horror, and that is Worm by Simon Ian Childer, about massive killer worms by the looks of it. So yes, so I will hopefully find something in that I liked. Okay, 1988 is Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, which, yes, I loved. I think it's my favourite Umberto Eco. It was a difficult read. My copy is underlined to the max with words that I needed to look up and concepts that I needed to look up. But yeah, despite the fact that it was quite a grueling read, I loved every minute of it. And just got so absorbed in it that one day when I was reading it on the train home from work, I missed my train stop. So yes, very much a challenge of a book, but totally worth it to get to kind of get through the language and the sort of intellectual content. 1989 then is Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers by Doug Naylor, and this is a Red Dwarf tie-in. Red Dwarf, for anybody who doesn't know, was a comedy series, BBC comedy series, sci-fi comedy series from the 1980s into the 90s, which I absolutely love. It's ridiculously silly. It can be very dry. It can be very just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous, really. Yeah, there was a couple of books, actually. There's a few books that are tie-ins or kind of prequels or, that kind of thing, written by the guys who, wrote the series. And so that is one of them. And I read that when I was a teenager and loved it. Okay, 1990, we've got a classic, which is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. And yes, I loved it. I certainly liked it a lot. I loved the movie more, but I really, really enjoyed the book. I read that, I think, it's either the beginning of this year or last year. And yeah, thoroughly enjoyable romp. Very different in terms of some of the characters, but really, really entertaining read. 1991, we've got American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, which I did not like at all. I hated that book. So I've picked an alternative to read, which is one that I will probably read for a project I've got coming up in October, where I read things that I'm a little bit scared to read, and that is Ring by Koji Suzuki. And yeah, I've had this on a list for a while, but I'm a little apprehensive about it, of whether it'll be a bit much for me based on sort of what I know about the films and things like that. So I'll give that a crack though, and if I can get through it, it might be the sort of thing that I actually really like. 1992, I haven't read anything from 1992, so I've picked something from my TBR or my wish list, and that is Thor by Wayne Smith, which I've mentioned before on the channel as something that I do really want to read. And this is told from the perspective of the family dog, who recognises a darkness, a danger in a stranger that comes into the family's lives, but of course can't tell anyone about it. It's kind of Thor's story. So yeah, really want to read that. I've seen lots of good reports of that one. Okay, 1993 is Bravo 20 by Andy McNab, and this is sort of based, it's sort of based on some of McNab's experiences. It's essentially a soldier who gets captured during the Gulf War, and I was fascinated by it. I think because at the time I was trying to understand the Gulf War, and it was it was quite hard reading in parts, certainly once he's captured. But yeah, very much. It has a lot of value to me, that one. I think it was kind of. I think it was a summer read actually, and I certainly as a teenager, I think I got a lot out of that. 1994 is Gender Outlaw on Men, Women, and the Rest of Us by Kate Bornstein. I absolutely love this book. Absolutely love it. This was super valuable to me when I was questioning my gender, when I was looking to transition. And also when I was trying to figure out where I fit in terms of, outside of a binary. And this was what I needed. This was one of the books that I really needed, and it's written with such humour, such heart, and such kind of honesty. It doesn't pull any punches, and yeah, Kate Bornstein's a bit of a hero to me. So yes, that's an absolute love, that one. 1995 is another gap. I don't have anything from 1995, so I thought I'd pick another Stephen King that I haven't read from my wish list, and that is Rose Madder, which I own. I've owned for a while and haven't got round to. I've got that on audiobook. So yes, I will pop that one or bump that one up the kind of the to read list, and get 1995 filled. 1996 is The Vagina Monologues by Eve Ensler, which I really like. I think it's more to do with the fact, I've seen it on stage a couple of times, in fact, and I went. It was when I was a student in Hull, sort of in the early 2000s, and I went with my PhD supervisor and my mum. And it was an interesting experience because the text itself is quite out there in parts, but it was done extremely well. It was, 4 well-known women from TV. Annika Rice was one of them. Leslie Joseph was another. And I can't remember. I forget who the other two were. But yeah, there's a couple of monologues in that which are hilarious. And yeah, if you've not read it, it's probably very much of its time now, but it's I think there's still a lot in it of value. But yeah, it's it's a great piece, but it's kind of almost theatre as well as it is just, you know, a book to read. So yeah, really love that. 1997, we've got Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. This is John Krakauer's own account of the 1995-6 Everest disaster. If I forget which year, I'll put it up on screen. I've mentioned this before. This is on my top 10 non-fiction list. I love this book. I've read it several times or listened to it several times. I have it as an audiobook. Really worthwhile read. It's very much a personal account, so it is, you know, his opinions on things and how things went down, but very well written, and very interesting. Sticking with the outdoor theme, but something rather more sedate, 1998 is A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This is Bill Bryson's story of his attempt to do the Appalachian Trail with his friend Mike Katz, I think his friend was called, and the people he meets along the way, and the trials and tribulations of doing the Appalachian Trail. And this was hilarious. I really enjoyed this. This is one that I listened to when I was camping and doing some hiking myself. And yeah, really enjoyed this. I will definitely listen to this again. 1999 then is The Drag King book, which again I've mentioned before, by Della Grace Volcano and J. Jack Halberstam. It's just full of wonderful pictures of sexy drag kings, and interviews as well with the kings themselves about why they do drag. Whole host of different identities in there, different reasons. There's some academic stuff in there from Halberstam, which is okay, but it's a bit dense, I guess. But it's for the, you know, you're looking at the pictures. It's a picture book. it's photographs of gorgeous drag kings. 2000, the year 2000 then, is The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break by Stephen Sherrill, which is another one that's on my top 10 list. Great bit of kind of quite surreal, I guess, magic realism, which brings the Minotaur from the Labyrinth into kind of a modern day setting where he's essentially a short order cook. It's written in the third person present, which was, I think that was the first time I read something in that kind of style. And it's just a really poignant, quite sad story about, you know, fitting in, about identity and about fitting in and relationships and things like that. It's a really interesting setup. And yeah, it really hit a nerve for me at the time when I read that. So yeah, that's a definite love. 2001 is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Would you call this magic realism, historical fiction? I'm not sure. It's a book about books and books within books, and yeah, a sort of a cemetery of forgotten books. That's the series that it's in, of which there are 4. This is the first, set in Barcelona, and yeah, just magical story. This was kind of one of my first forays into sort of the literary mystery type stuff, and yeah, I fell in love with this quite quickly. 2002 is Genderqueer Voices from Beyond the Sexual Binary by various writers. It's essentially an academic text with various different articles in it. And again, at the time, I was studying this kind of thing anyway. I was a master's student in gender studies. But again, you know, it's stuff that really started to help clarify things in my mind about my own identity. And to realise that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't kind of an oddity, you know, an anomaly, that there were other people out there with similar identities and also with similar philosophies and ideas and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, really important book that to me. Absolutely love it. 2003 is my favourite non-fiction of all time, which is Mountains of the Mind, A History of a Fascination by Robert Macfarlane. Absolutely glorious book, both in terms of the writing style of Macfarlane's, which I just adore, the sort of sections that are his tales of his adventures in the mountains, and how that relates to the history of, you know, the fascination that a lot of us have with mountains, where that comes from, and elements of things like geology, ecology, prehistory, ideas around deep time. It's just a glorious book. 2004 is Becoming a Visible Man by Jameson Green, another one that was extremely important to me at that time, when I was questioning my own identity and looking to transition and all that kind of stuff. And this is Jameson Green's kind of, it's part autobiography, but it discusses, it's part sort of social studies as well. You know, and again, just another really important book on trans stuff for me. 2005 is Dead as a Doornail, which is the Sucky Stackhouse series, number 5, the book 5, by Charlaine Harris. So this is what True Blood was based on, this series. This I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it. It was very much a meh. This was at the point at which kind of the series started to kind of take a bit of a nosedive for me. I read, I think, 4 more after this, and then just tapped out. But yeah, I think this was the first one where I kind of went, oh, because I'd really liked the previous ones. So yeah, I'm gonna put in an alternative here of something to read that's on my that's been on my wish list for, I think, years at this point, and I keep getting told, yeah, you should read this, you probably really like it. And that is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. It sounds like my kind of thing, kind of mysterious, maybe a bit sort of literary mysterious. And so, yeah, so I think I need to knuckle down and read that and try and, you know, hopefully get something in for 2005 that I like. 2006, we've got No Shortcuts to the Top by Ed Viesturs. This is a love. This is also on my top 10 non-fiction. This is Ed Viesturs' account of his own personal challenge to climb all of the 8,000 metre peaks in the world, of which there are 14. And I think it's a brilliantly written book. It's, you know, it looks at his expeditions to do this, but also his history, how he got into climbing, his, you know, how he approaches risk, how he manages his expeditions whilst he also has a family, and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's a really entertaining book, exciting book, and just quite, you know, it's quite a warm read as well. It's like it's an easy read because he just keeps you hooked in. He's a really interesting guy, and he's got a really nice writing style. 2007 is The Shop Doctrine by Naomi Klein, and I read this, I think, after seeing the film, because I just basically wanted more information. I wanted more than that you can fit into the film, basically. And yeah, really interesting, quite eye-opening book and content for me. Very much valued Naomi Klein's writing. 2008 is Custom Graphics by Julian Baum, which I've shown on my top 10 art and design books, which I will link to. I'll link to all of my top 10 videos where things, you know, where I've got stuff about these books in the description. But yeah, this is great. A great look at lowbrow, trashy, burlesque, hot rod, rock and roll style graphics. And yeah, it's just a fantastic, fun book to flick through. It gives me a lot of inspiration. especially in terms of colour, things like that. It's just great, fun artwork, fun graphics. So yeah, love that one. 2009 is The Strain by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan. I wouldn't say I loved this, but I liked it. I definitely liked it. Yeah, interesting premise, kind of good bit of mystery to it. A good romp, basically. A good dark romp of some vampire-y stuff. 2010, my all-time favourite book of any genre, and that's The Passage by Justin Cronin, which I've talked about plenty in various videos on this channel, so I won't blether on about it again, other than to say, I love it, I love it, I love it. And I don't know whether anything will ever knock it off the top spot. Yeah, it's just brilliant. 2011 is 11/22/63 by Stephen King, which is one of the Stephen Kings I really don't like. I just, it's not what I want out of a Stephen King novel at all. And I just found myself bored with it in a lot of places. There was the premise of it I really liked, but it just dragged a lot for me. I just couldn't get into it at all. I read it to completion, but it was a chore. It felt like a chore. So yeah, unfortunately, just not one of the Stephen Kings that I like at all. So I've picked an alternative for 2011, and that is The Cabin in the Woods by Tim Leben, which is the official novelisation of the movie, the horror movie. That will be read for Garb August, I should think. It's one of the ones on my massive pile of possibilities, but it's one that I do want to read, because I've never seen the movie, because I'm not sure whether it's too scary for me. So I want to read the book, find out if I like the premise, and then if I like the book, I might watch the movie if I don't think it's going to scare the pants off me. So yes, that's my alternative. 2012 is The 12 by Justin Cronin, which is the second in the Passage trilogy, which, whilst it's nowhere near the level of the Passage for me, it's still a great book, and the whole trilogy is for me. So The 12 is definitely the favourite thing. I've read quite a few in that year, a few books from that year, and yeah, that one is by far and away still my favourite. 2013 is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which is a very recent read for me. That was a read in May, or a listen in May, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. It was an audiobook read by Neil Gaiman. It was story time with Neil. It was a children's story for adults. It was magical. It was a wonderful evening time read. And yeah, absolutely fantastic, and it's made me want to read all the Neil Gaiman. 2014 is Murder Most Unladylike by Robin Stevens, which I got because I liked some of the stuff that Robin Stevens was talking about on Twitter. She's been a very, very outspoken trans ally, and she's a children's writer. And so this is a middle grade book, and it's basically Agatha Christie meets sort of Mallory Towers, sort of 1930s girls' boarding school murder mysteries, and it's charming and funny, and really it's really, as I say, it's set in the 30s, but it's written with modern sensibilities in terms of, sort of queer identities and acceptance and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just a very charming, fun little story for sort of middle grade readers. 2015 was A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. There was nothing from this publication year that I particularly liked. I think I read about 6 from this publication year. There's nothing particularly. everything was meh or worse, and this was a meh. This was probably the least meh of the meh, but but yeah, still not nothing that I kind of write home about. So I'm going to put an alternative into this, and that is The Scarlet Gospels by Clive Barker, because I read The Hellbound Heart recently, and I want to read more about the Cenobites. I like the darkness of that world. So yeah, definitely want to read more on that. 2016 is Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, which is by Kai Cheng Tom. I read this for Transgirl April and absolutely adored it. This is a wonderful sort of magic realist story of a young sort of trans woman and sort of found family, sort of how dealing with transphobic society, sort of dealing with rage and violence as well, and the kind of the feelings of rage and violence that the central character has. Yeah, this, and it's told so beautifully. The prose in this is wonderful. It's very poetic. There's even sections of it that almost read like poetry. And yeah, it's a fabulous book. 2017 is Blood, Sweat and Pixels by Jason Schreier. It's non-fiction about the trials and tribulations of making video games, and it's a series of it documents various different games and what went into making them, from tiny little one person dude in his bedroom making a game to big, AAA multi-million-pound game development, the big boys. Very, very well done, fascinating, even on the games that I really, in terms of playing them, really don't care about. It's just very, very interesting. 2018 is The Outsider by Stephen King, which I do really like. That is a Stephen King I really like. I like the premise. I like the kind of the setting of it. I like most of the characters in it. I think are again, King writes character generally really, really well. But it's got Holly Gibney in it. It's Holly Gibney is a character that I absolutely love. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's creepy. It's not scary, but it is creepy. And yeah, one of the Stephen Kings I do really, really rate. 2019, I read a ton from 2019, and I really liked everything from this year. But one that I've not talked about before, I think, on the channel, is Love Lives Here, a story of thriving in a transgender family, by Amanda Jete Knox, who is a Canadian author. I got to say, like, when they wrote this, they used she, her pronouns, but they've since come out as non-binary, so I think they now use they, them. But this is Amanda's account of what it was like for them to go through both the coming out and sort of negotiating one of their children's transition and coming out as trans, and then not long after their child came out, their spouse came out as well as a trans woman, and transitioned, and how they've negotiated that as a family, and the difficulties with that, but also that it is that love wins out, that they were all able to remain such a close family unit and become closer as well because of it. It was quite an emotional read, I think, and it was one of the first books that I'd read that was told from kind of the perspective of somebody who it wasn't the person transitioning, it wasn't the person coming out, it was a significant other, so it's an interesting account. Okay, 2020. I've got Cemetery Boys by Ian Thomas, which I only just read last month and loved it. Yeah, this is a cracking YA novel about a transgender teen, Yadriel, and his kind of quest to prove himself as a brujo to his Latinx family and community, and a friendship that develops and a relationship that develops between him and a ghost that he inadvertently summons of a sort of a classmate, I guess, fellow student who's recently been killed, and the mystery surrounding who killed Julian. So yes, very good discussion of some of the trans issues and just a great sort of fantasy story and romance. 2021, I think again I've read quite a lot from this year and I enjoyed them all, and I'm going to include this one because this one was an absolute shocker that I liked this. And this was Soul Eater, which is the first in a series called Monstrous by Lily Mayne. And this is male monster romance, and it's spicy romance as well. It's a post-apocalyptic setting where monsters have kind of invaded from an alternative dimension, if you like, through a portal that's opened, and the world is left kind of as a monster ridden wasteland. So that's what the series is, and this is the first in the series. I've read 2 in the series, and I will be reading some more for Garb August. But yeah, this one, total shocker that I enjoyed this as much as I did. Yeah, just a really quite sweet romance, but as I say, quite spicy as well. Fun. This was all out fun, this, and the world building in it was good as well. I was interested in the world as well as the characters. So yes. Okay, 2022, I've got Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes by Eric LaRocca. This is a series of short stories. Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is kind of, I guess, more of maybe a novella. But all of them in the collection are good, but the title story is one of those that I'm still thinking about it. I read it in April and I'm still thinking about it, and it's made me want to read again, like with Neil Gaiman, everything that Eric LaRocca writes. So I have a ton of Eric LaRocca on my wish list now. And 2023, we are up to date, and the one from this year, I've only read one released this year, and that is Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon. I can't say that I loved this. It was, yeah, but I can't say I didn't like it either. It's not like meh, but it's just like it's all right. You know, there was plenty to it that I could find value in, but there was, it was okay. It was just one where I was kind of, yeah, it was okay. It was short and it was, a fun read for the amount of time it took. But it wasn't a mind-blowing book. So I put an alternative in for this. There are 2 alternatives for 2023. One is The Ferryman by Justin Cronin, which I will be starting very, very shortly. I'm just finishing up an audiobook at the moment. I'm reading Jaws at the moment, or listening to Jaws, and then I will be starting The Ferryman. And I've been wanting to read this since it came out in May, and I'm very excited about it, and I really hope that it lives up to my excitement. And the other one is Monstrilio, which I started. I got a copy eventually after supply issues in the UK, and started and got into, and got probably, I think it was about 70 pages in, was loving it, and then found that there were pages missing. There was a print issue with the copy that I'd got, so I still haven't sourced an alternative copy yet, but I do definitely want to read that as well, and I think that came out in the UK at the end of April. So there we have it. Not quite managed to find things that I loved for every year, although I've not done too bad. And as I say, there were a couple of gaps there. Only two gaps, 2 years where I didn't have anything. So that's not too bad. That's better than I thought it was. I had to dig around outside of like Goodreads and stuff like that to find stuff. But yeah, there is stuff that I've read for most years of my 42 years. It's an interesting little experiment. This I would recommend if you fancy it, give it a go. It's interesting to look back and see whether you can fill all of your years. So I will leave it there today. Thank you very much for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving me a like and subscribing for more content coming very soon. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.